Hi there, I'm Dave from Projex Academy, and a warm welcome to our PRINCE2 7th edition Process and Management Product Roadmap. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, the official PRINCE2 manual or guide shows that there are 7 processes, and here they are, and there are also 7 practices, which used to be called themes. Although I shall refer to the practices from time to time, I do not intend to show them here, but rather keep the focus on how these processes, which after all are the framework of PRINCE2, how they work together, as this can often be confusing to folks first looking at the massive details in the official guide. So let's start our story up here top left. Indeed, within PRINCE2, the highest layer is called the business layer, also known as the commissioning layer. And these are senior managers who are responsible for triggering a project into being in the first place. And they do this by issuing what's known as a project mandate, as I'm about to explain. This will trigger the first process called starting up a project, or SU if you will. And this process is the only one which is pre-project. The project doesn't formally start until starting up a project is finished. The initiating a project process, or IP, is where the project initiation documentation is assembled. So this is where most of the detailed planning occurs at project level. The managing a stage boundary process has really just 2 purposes. It's normally triggered as the project approaches the end of a particular stage, and the project manager wants to prepare for an end stage assessment, which is run by the project board, and they live in the directing a project process. Within each of these processes, by the way, there are activities, and I'll be sharing those with you as we proceed. But I've left one here right from the very start. It's called Give Ongoing Direction. And as you might gather from that, it's a communication conduit. It's where the project board can communicate with the commissioning layer or to the project manager down in controlling a stage, or indeed any other key stakeholders. And it's also where the commissioning layer or the project manager can ask questions of the project board. So there are 3 roles in the project board executive, the senior user, and the senior supplier roles. These are roles, not people, although the executive, much like the project manager, is only ever filled by one person. So there is a second trigger for the managing a stage boundary process, and that is if the project board, as a result of tolerance being exceeded, requests an exception plan. So this will be triggered for an exception plan also. Much more of that to come. So the controlling a stage is where the project manager lives. And, as you are aware, there are at least 2 management stages. The initiation stage, which is where the bid is assembled, and at least one other. These other management stages are typically called delivery stages. Why? Because in those stages, unlike the initiation stage, is where the specialist products are created. And the managing product delivery process, or MP, is run and managed by the team manager. And it's in here, as I've said, where the specialist products are created. When it comes to closing down a project, we have naturally enough the closing a project, or CP, process. This too can be triggered by 2 situations. The first is coming to a natural end in the last management stage, where the project manager will start to shut the project down. The other time in which it's used is if the project board decide to prematurely close the project, then it is they who will trigger closing a project. Once more, the project manager will be running around, shutting the project down as a premature project. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's come back up here. So the mandate, what exactly is it? Well, you could see it as a terms of reference. It could be an email, it could be a simple report, it could be the result of a meeting or a management decision, or it could be the final report from a feasibility study. Any of these are possible. And directly this triggers the starting up a project, pre-project. The first 2 things that need to happen is the project board executive needs to be appointed and the project manager. It may be that the project mandate names these 2 individuals. As a minimum, it must name the project board executive. If that's the case, then it's the project board's executive. First important task is to assign the project manager to this project. So the project mandate should, as a minimum, provide the subject matter of the project and who the project board executive is. It should therefore outline the scope or, for example, set project level tolerances. At a high level, it should state what the benefits are expected or are there any constraints. This mandate will be further refined in the starting up a project process to become what's known as the project brief. More of that shortly. The project brief, in and of itself, will later be refined when we're into the initiation stage, into the Project Initiation Documentation, or PID as it's known. Now, inside each of these processes, there are activities, and these are shown in sequence, some in series, some in parallel. And that's exactly how I'll portray them here. However, getting real power from PRINCE2 7th edition is all about tailoring it to suit a specific project. So I'd rather you see these activities, of which this is one, as I've explained, as a checklist. So you go through these and decide how you need to use them and in which order. So let's move on then. In starting up a project, the first thing you'll want to do is to set up the project organisation as far as it can be, in terms of the structure, roles and responsibilities. So we know we'll do that for the project board executive and for the project manager. It may well be that the other two roles of senior user and senior supplier, for many reasons, possibly not enough information yet, they may or may not be appointed at this juncture. If the senior supplier, for example, can't be known at this point, you may well have someone to handhold that particular role, such as someone from your purchasing department, until the real supplier or suppliers are known. Again, I'll make this point here, is that these are three roles. The executive and the project manager, wherever you see them, will be filled by one individual. But the senior user role may be filled by several users with an interest in the project. Similarly, the senior supplier role may be filled by other suppliers, all with an interest in the project. So back up here then, we'll learn that there are various logs and registers that need to be set up, and they reside in what's known as the project log. So as you'll see in this video, the project log will consist of 4 registers and 2 logs, and here they are. So the daily log, much like a project manager's diary, hence me showing it looking a little like a filofax, although these days it's more likely to be an application on your smartphone, and the lessons log. This needs to be set up, and it's normally the project manager that will go out and investigate and find any lessons that would be suitable to be applied to this project. If your organisation has a project office or a project support part of your organisation, they may well indeed have this information in some form of a library that can be used by the project manager. So these lessons can be applied directly to this project. As the project progresses through its various management stages, the lessons log will also be filled up with lessons that have been learned through carrying out this project. So at the end of the project, in closing a project, these lessons can be passed back into the organisation for use on future similar projects. So the daily log is a bit like the diary for a project manager and could contain just about anything: meeting minutes, to-do lists, any issues or risks that the project manager is currently dealing with, and so on. When we get into the initiation stage, the daily log will continue to be used throughout the project, but only for informal purposes, such as informal issues. Other than that, the project log, which consists of these 2 elements only at this juncture, will be populated later on with, for example, the issue register and risk register, in which case the daily log issues and risks, if there are any that are ongoing, will be transferred. More of that later. So back here to starting up a project pre-project. So we have our organisation set up, such as it is at this moment, and we now come to the project brief, one of the 2 main management products that are created during the starting up a project process. Now the project brief consists of what's known as the outline business case. At this juncture, it may well be that the project mandate does contain some outline information regarding the business case. For example, expected benefits, timescales, risks, or what have you. Nonetheless, here, part of the project brief will contain the outline business case, refining such information if it exists. There won't be anything detailed here, such as investment appraisal techniques, because at this early juncture, we haven't done any detailed planning. But as I've said, it could contain expected benefits, a likely project budget, and key timeframes driven, frankly, from business needs. It may have any existing business risks that are known at this point. Inside the project brief, there's another important document, and that's the project product description. Now this, as you would imagine, describes the end product from the project. So if you're delivering a new computer system, this describes it. If it's a new building, this describes it. But importantly, within the project product description, it'll have two important sets of metrics. The first is called the user's quality expectations, and this is normally set out in a prioritized form, but of generic statements such as it must be easy to use, or low cost to maintain, or easy to upgrade, or it must be fast, or lightweight, or anything such as that. These should be prioritized so that we can understand how the user would see the importance of these. So the project manager would collect this user's quality expectations and refine it into what's known as acceptance criteria. The difference here is that acceptance criteria must be measurable. So the metrics you're going to be writing down here, typically functional and non-functional features or specifications, must have real numbers in them so that they can be measured. Oh, and by the way, the outline business case will be refined into the full business case when you and I come to the initiating a project process. In a similar way, the project product description, along with the business case, will be continuously refined as the project goes through its various management stages. Also part of the project brief, along with the project organisational roles and responsibilities, is the project approach. This, for example, might describe whether you're going to use an agile or iterative and incremental approach rather than a linear approach or waterfall approach. Or it might be the approach chosen in terms of developing the end product. You might be taking an existing product and refining it and updating it, or start with a brand new design. Another approach might be the approach to resourcing the project. For example, you may have skilled software services in-house, but you would need to procure via a third-party specialists for the creation of hardware, or for example, enclosure design, or to meet some regulations which would need an external test house, as another example. Now, in a PRINCE2 project, there are at least two stages. The initiation stage, which is where the initiating a project process is used to create the bid, and at least one other stage. Typically, this other stage would be called a delivery stage. Why? Well, because in the initiation stage, it's all about planning, pulling together the PID, if you will. But management stages after that will be about creating the specialist products, and they're made down here in the managing product delivery process. Here's our team manager waiting to receive the first work package, as you'll learn later. But the point I'm making here, there may be several delivery stages, but at least one delivery stage. So every PRINCE2 project has at least two stages, the initiation stage plus one delivery stage. Back to my point here with the initiation stage plan. Each stage will consume time, money, resources, people, facilities, you name it. And so the project board, before they approve the first management stage, the initiation stage, want a plan showing how much this first stage will actually cost. How much resources do we need? How long will it take? And so on. So the project manager creates the initiation stage plan in the pre-project starting up a project process to put before the project board along with the project brief for them to make a decision on what to do next. After all, their decision might be, having looked at the information here, to decide not to proceed any further. However, let's see what comes next. So this will culminate in a project initiation request put before the newly formed project board. And this is their first activity called Authorize Initiation. That is, authorizing the initiation stage. And let's suppose, so I can continue drawing my roadmap, the answer is yes, they like it. So this becomes the formal project start, since this was pre-project. And at the same moment, the project manager will be given authorization to start the initiation stage, called, as you can see, Initiate a Project Authorization. So here we are now in the initiation stage, where there's more than one process being used, certainly the initiating a project process, or IP, where the PID is assembled, but also, as we get to the end of that stage, the managing a stage boundary process to prepare a plan for the next stage. Let's pause for a moment. That's an important point I've just made. And that is, In the same way that in starting up a project, we needed a plan for the next stage, in this case it's the first stage, and that is used as part of the information for the project board to make an informed choice. So too at the end of the initiation stage, you would want a next stage plan put before the project board in directing a project, so once more they have the information and data to make an informed choice about what to do next. So let's now look at the activities within the initiating a project process. The first is to agree the tailoring requirements. And this will be based primarily on the project approach, as that will factor exactly what we're going to tailor and how. And it'll also use other information in the project brief. For example, the business case may give clues about which is the right tailoring method to use, as will what the end product at this juncture might look like, with its quality expectations and acceptance criteria. Once this has happened, we then agree management approaches, of which there's 9, and here they are. So let's go through these management approaches. First of all, we have the change management approach, which is not about how you change the project. It's used to establish the target organisational state required for the project to meet its objectives. In other words, it's about changing the organisation, and it does this by including the means by which the business will shift from the current state and through any interim states. The communication management approach, and by the way, all of these approaches see them as strategies, if you will. Is this the approach you're taking to communicate throughout the project? The new kid on the block here is sustainability. This is the approach you're taking to ensure you meet your sustainability goals. Sustainability goals are contained within the business case. Then you have benefits management approach, the companion, if you will, to the business case. And here the benefits management approach says what benefits are you seeking to achieve, how you're going to achieve them, when you're going to achieve them, what resources you need, and what you're going to measure. A new approach is the commercial management approach. Now, the commercial management approach is used to describe the procedures, techniques, and standards that need to be applied for effective commercial management. And as you might expect, this will cover the approach to secure, service and maintain all commercial agreements required for the project to be a success. Then you have the quality management approach, describing exactly how you will approach quality. Then similarly, you have the risk management approach and issue management approach. Now, in PRINCE2, one of the old practices from the 6th edition PRINCE2 was called the change control approach, which was always a bit of a misnomer because changes are a subset of issues, as we're about to look at very shortly. So the issue management approach describes how issues will be captured and reported and explain how changes to the project baseline will be assessed and controlled. So this contains both the issue reporting and resolution procedure as well as the change control procedure. Another new approach is digital and data. Now this describes what data is to be managed. It goes on to explain what the digital technology requirements are and what the data management requirements are and the procedures needed to manage both digital and data. So the next activities are to, in parallel, prepare the project plan and establish the project controls. And when it comes to establishing project controls, as I'm sure you know, there are many. For example, end-stage assessments, checkpoint reports, and so on and so forth. And it's time now to introduce the project log. Way back here, when I was telling you about the starting up a project, I said we would set up the lessons log and the daily log. These are the fledgling pair, if you will, that will end up being in the project log when it's set up here in initiating a project. In addition, let's talk about these issues. In the 7th edition, issues have quite rightly been expanded to cover problems or concerns, they're an issue, some external project event, or maybe it's a positive issue, such as a business opportunity. When it comes to changes, we have a request for change and an off specification. And also, just a small icon here to remind you of the brand new people chapter within PRINCE2, and that's of leading successful change, as well as leading successful teams and communication, bearing in mind that people always have been, but now are, central to the PRINCE2 7th edition method. And while we're on controls, I want to mention tolerances. We now have 7 tolerances: time, cost, scope, quality, risk and benefits, but with the addition of sustainability. All of these form part of what's known as project controls and will need to be embedded here at this point. Following on from that, because now we have the project plan, we can prepare the full business case. What's different from back here, you may ask? Well, the answer is we now have time and costs and a better understanding of risk. So the full business case, including, for example, the investment appraisal, can be pulled together and will form part of the bid. Talking of that, we now need to take all this information and to assemble the bid itself. So now, the project manager needs to go back to the project board in directing a project and ask them to authorize the project. Now, the words here are very important. This occurs at the first end stage assessment, which is at the end of the first stage, called the initiation stage. So the project board come together now and decide whether the project makes sense. Not the next stage, the whole project, based on the project plan. Now, the project plan will contain information about the number of stages at this point, but here we're merely authorizing the project. So watch carefully. Remember, we are in the initiation stage, like any other management stage, except this is all about planning and assembling the bid. Nonetheless, as the project manager sees the end of the initiation stage coming up fast, this will trigger the project manager, since the stage boundary is approaching, to prepare the next stage plan. Remember, this is the initiation stage, and there will always be at least one more, and possibly several management stages, and this is for the next stage plan, which will include creating the specialist products. And it's time to remind you, although I'm not going to show it in detail, about the product-based planning technique within PRINCE2. It's no different in the 7th edition, but what this means is we will use the product-based planning technique, starting off with understanding what the products are, creating a product breakdown structure, product descriptions coming up in a second, and the product flow diagram. So whenever you see a stage plan being created, and yes, that goes for the initiation stage plan as well, and more to be mentioned shortly, we would create product descriptions. Now, I've also given a reminder to the project log, which we mentioned up here. Now, the project log, or at least parts of it, will constantly be referred to, updated and amended as the project proceeds through its various stages. But I thought it particularly important to mention here, since in managing a stage boundary, we're creating the next stage plan. And, as you're about to find out, updating the project plan. So it's highly likely the project log will get a lot of action here. For example, as we create the next stage plan, new or modified issues and risks will occur, lessons will be learned, and the product register identifies the products to be delivered by the project and also records their acceptance. The quality register contains updates on the road to quality for each product. Has the product been created yet? Has the quality checks been carried out? Have they been approved? And so on. And our old friends, the lessons log and the daily log, you already know a fair bit about. So wherever we see creating a plan, whether it's a project plan, a stage plan, a team plan, or even an exception plan, you'll almost certainly have product-based planning involved, and that will mean product descriptions. I just reference it here because it's probably one of the most important places once we're underway. You may rest assured that when we prepared the project plan up here, we also would have created product descriptions and used the product-based planning technique. Moving on. So let's remind ourselves, we've got the bid signed off and everyone's going, great stuff. This project is going to proceed, but no one can do anything yet. Why? Because the project manager is given authority to manage the project one stage at a time. So before we go anywhere further, the project manager needs to create the next stage plan. Having done that, since this is the first time we've created the next stage plan and it will have a greater level of detail than the project plan said, we'll now need to harmonize that or update the project plan to make one a perfect subset of the other. But now we've updated the project plan, maybe in terms of time, costs, schedule, resources, the definition of products, and so on and so forth, we now need in a similar way to update the business case. But not just the business case, which, can I remind you, contains sustainability, targets and tolerances, here they are mentioned up here, but also the benefits management approach, one of the approaches we talked about here. Of course, at the end of each stage, we'll want to look at other elements within the PID and update those as appropriate. You see, although we've signed off the PID here, and it becomes the baseline version, as we go through each stage, it's highly likely that elements of the PID will be updated. However, I have to say that here, having just signed it off, that the updates here should be minimal apart from those already mentioned. Having done that, we now need, in managing a stage boundary, to evaluate the stage, one of the activities. And what this does is it creates the end stage report. Yes, as we come towards the end of any management stage, including the initiation stage, the project manager creates an end stage report. This will often contain lessons within it. However, for reasons of communication and distribution, the project manager may choose to have a separate lessons report. So that all occurs within the activity evaluate the stage. That's the stage just finished. Now, of course, we've got that. The whole point of managing a stage boundary is to get this information, update the PID and so on, and to request the next stage. Where does that occur? Watch carefully. Here we go. This now causes the project manager to request the next stage of the project board. Well, pay attention. That happens at an end stage assessment using the activity Authorize a Stage or Exception Plan. We'll come to exception plans a little later in this diagram, but for now, what are you seeing here? 2 end stage assessments? They're a meeting, after all, by the project board, although that could be done electronically or as a video conference call. Not necessarily so. They're 2 distinct activities in terms of what you need to look at and agree on, but they could be held at the same meeting, couldn't they? For example, when the project manager has got the PID already assembled and ready to authorize the project, he or she could go dive into here, create the next stage plan and all this stuff, and then request the next stage and have these 2 points being one meeting. Again, it's about tailoring and suitability for the project, whatever makes good sense. Now we've just finished the initiation stage, which includes using the initiating a project process and managing a stage boundary, and now it's time to start the first delivery stage. How does that occur? Well, in this activity, authorize a stage plan, as we're going to look at it now, this is now the project board authorizing the stage to start and telling the project manager in the controlling a stage process. So this, my friend, is the first time we're using controlling a stage in the PRINCE2 method. It's worth just pausing for a moment here that in some projects, when you're in the initiation stage, maybe some of the work will include, for example, letting a contract or using some other form of specialist resource. So the manual states quite correctly, sometimes, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore other than at this point, during the initiation stage, controlling a stage may be used as well as managing product delivery. And here's a mindset I want you to immediately get. When we talk about specialist products, we, or at least I do as an engineer, tend to think about specialism meaning hardware, software, electronic, you name it. But frankly, managing product delivery as a specialist delivery arm may be talking about commercial specialism or legal specialism. So during the initiation stage, the project board may have the project manager working in controlling a stage, giving out a work package description so that the managing product delivery team will be putting a contract in place or negotiating some particular set of specialist skills elsewhere. All right, pause again. Let's get back to where we were. We've just approved the next stage plan. Whether it's 1 or 2 meetings, we've now agreed to proceed to the next stage, which in this case is the first delivery stage, maybe one of many. So the stage is authorized and the project manager authorizes a work package description. He or she does not give out a work package per se, but to give out a work package description. And this is sent to the team manager in the accept a work package activity. Well, if you were this individual and you're looking at a work package description, what exactly would you be doing? You'd be making sure that before you accept a work package that you can do it. And what does that mean? Can do it in terms of technical, resource, cost, timeframes, you name it. So although the PRINCE2 manual talks about the team plan being optional, frankly, if you want my opinion, it never is. Even if the team plan is just a checklist on a scrap piece of paper, it's the team manager making sure that when they say, I accept this work package and we can start on it immediately, they mean it because they've got everything in place, including any constraints such as tolerances or other external situations that exist at this moment. So this is really a handshake, as you can see. So what occurs in managing product delivery is in executing a work package, which is where the products are built, quality checks, for the want of a better word, are carried out, and ultimately the products are approved. And the quality register is our little storyline, if you will, showing the progress of each product. So if within a work package you've got 6 products to create, each one will be in a quality register, the date work started, has it been tested, has it been approved yet? So the quality register is a little built-in progress machine, which is very, very useful. So that's executing a work package. However, when the project manager authorized the work package description, amongst the product descriptions and any other constraints that were laid down, it would also advise how often the project manager wants progress checks. Typically weekly, but it could be any other time. And this is in the new activity called Evaluate a Work Package, where the so-called checkpoint report is given back to the project manager in controlling a stage, and the activity the project manager uses is Evaluate Work Package Status to check exactly how we're doing. Is it on track? Now ultimately, as the work package is gradually completed, and by that I mean the products are approved and signed off, it may be time for the project manager to give out the next work package. Because of course within a stage there could be several work packages given out to the same team, one after the other, or sometimes several at a time, or maybe also in parallel to other teams, because there may be more than one team involved here. So the managing product delivery process will be used by each team. Imagine you had a hardware group and a software group, and therefore each would get their own relevant work package description, and they would be going through this as an entity, while the other group would be doing exactly the same thing. However, getting to my point, ultimately let's assume that this particular work package has indeed been completed. The project manager needs to be informed of that. So the team manager, our little chum here, needs to notify the project manager that this work package is complete by giving out a completed work package notice. And here's the project manager. His or her activity will be to receive these completed work packages. Now, it's always been a little bit vague here, but let's be quite clear. A work package is usually a document, electronic or otherwise, with information that the team manager needs to accept. The products don't exist yet, only the product descriptions. Every work package contains at least one, although often several. So this notify work package completion is really saying of the one or more products within that work package, they are now approved products. And that is what the team manager is advising the project manager here. The project manager receives this completion notice and hopefully agrees with it. What happens next is interesting. Is this the first and final work package within this stage, or are there others? Well, what the project manager now needs to do is, having received it, is to double check that is this the last work package or not. But before I get to that, what now needs to happen, because it's one thing saying, yes, the work package is complete, but how does that relate? And this is a very, very important activity. Evaluate stage status. Remember, the project manager had the stage plan authorized, and here it is. And it's the project manager's job to manage progress against that stage plan. So when he or she is evaluating stage status, he or she is doing just that. Are we on track? Are we behind? Are we ahead? What are the problems? And so on and so forth. So as part of evaluating stage status, something else needs to happen, which when the project board approved the stage plan, they insisted upon, and that is the project manager gives them a regular highlight report. Now this will typically be monthly, but once more it could be any other time frame that makes sense for the project. And yes, the highlight report would look back at the various checkpoint reports, typically weekly, and use the information on how that's doing and look at that in the context of the entire stage. And the highlight report reports on that. Again, I don't intend to go into the details of what's in a highlight report. Suffice to say, each highlight report starts off by saying, here's what we promised you last time, here's what we've done, what are the issues and risks, what are the forecasts for next month, and so on. So it provides an update to the project board. And here's our very, very useful communication conduit, both ways should it be necessary, give ongoing direction. So here we're informing the project board exactly how we're doing partway through the current stage. Continuing. Well, having evaluating stage status, tell me, my friend, have you ever known a project that goes exactly to the plan all the time? There are always going to be slightly different deviations. Estimating, after all, is an art, not a science. We can get it pretty good, but ultimately an estimate is an estimate. Plus, what about the outside world? That has a funny habit of changing by the moment without any regard to our project. For example, external markets or commercial situations may change, meaning that maybe we need to make micro adjustments within the stage. And this is important. This isn't, oh dear, we've blown tolerance, we've got to do something different. This is the project manager steering the ship through rough seas and taking slight deviations to actually keep on track to reach the next port. So this is called take corrective action. It's small actions that need to be taken quite naturally and normally within a project. These would not be happening if it meant unless the corrective action is going to fix the small deviation. Now, the way in which this often happens, it might be the project manager going and having a chat down the corridor with a few people to sort it out, if it's that sort of a problem. But ultimately, it might mean tweaking the work package to include these extra actions. So once more, there might be a little handover here where the work package is a modified version, perhaps including one or two extra tasks or activities. Since it's the team manager and the specialist team that will be carrying those corrections out, they need to be advised of it. But I'll say one more time, the take corrective action may be of the management type, in which case they don't need to be involved. And talking of corrective action, in fact, any actions throughout the project, there's a very powerful activity in directing a project called give ongoing direction. Notice it's two-way. It's a communication conduit. So it could be the project manager requesting advice from the project board that they might then use to take this corrective action or not. And it's also where the project board can provide answers or advice of their own to the project manager. So this is ongoing, frankly, between directing a project and controlling a stage. And although not shown here, give ongoing direction could also be upwards and outwards to any other key stakeholders. So the project board could, for example, be giving advice to the commissioning or business layer or any other senior stakeholders. Back into controlling a stage. So let's remind ourselves where we've got to. We're giving out work packages, the work's being done, and we're getting them finished. Then we give out the next work package within that stage, and the cycle continues. But what about when you get to the point where it's the last work package in that particular stage and it's been completed, where you can't go any further? What the project manager's got to do, seeing that the stage boundary is approaching, therefore, watch carefully, is to trigger the use managing a stage boundary process again and create the next stage plan, ready for an end stage assessment. Does that make sense? So the project manager will go through all of this stuff again, I won't repeat myself, and then request the next stage, and the next stage occurs, and we're around this little cycle here, this round robin, if you will, between directing a project, controlling a stage, managing a stage boundary, and managing product delivery. But life is not that simple. I've talked about taking corrective action and the project manager keeping on track best they can, but what about if something occurs which would drive the project beyond tolerances? Do you remember these up here? There's the 7. And what if during a particular management stage, something occurs that rocks the boat? Come down here and watch very carefully. What we're talking about is a new issue arising, or possibly an extreme risk. Be aware, as PRINCE2 states, that very often new issues arise as a result of creating the specialist products in managing product delivery. So this is a very common place where new issues will first show their ugly phases. What the team manager must do is to raise it as an issue. The team manager takes no corrective action. If it's an issue they can't deal with, then an issue is raised by them and sent to the project manager in the activity called Capture and Examine Issues and Risks. Well, that's one over here. So maybe the project manager has just been advised about this issue from managing product delivery, or maybe it's come from another source. It doesn't matter. This activity, Capture and Examine Issues, and again, for this diagram, I'm not going to go into details about the issues practice or the risk practice and how this occurs. Nonetheless, an impact analysis will occur, and as part of doing that, an issue report will be raised to accompany the input in the issue register. Once more, watch the arrows. When this occurs, we need to ask ourselves, so what? Is this a biggie? Is it a small one? What? We need to compare that to the activity called evaluate stage status. So it's the context of this issue, whether it emanated from other sources or from the managing product delivery. What does this mean to the stage status? And based on that, it may well be that this new issue means that we can take corrective action and all is well and good, and we just inform the project manager of what needed to be done in the next highlight report. But suppose that in evaluating stage status, we can see in the analysis that this issue or risk will blow stage and maybe project tolerance, in which case, emanating from this, we need to use an activity called escalate issues and risks. And in essence, this means raising an exception report, which the project manager will send to the project board via the activity give ongoing direction. Now, let's be clear. The exception report talks about what we've found, what the issue is, what its impact is, what tolerances are going to be blown, and so on and so forth. But also the exception report from the project manager says, here's the options we've got for recovery or minimization. And of those options, here's the one I recommend. What do you think? And this is sent to the project board, who now consider this. They may agree with the exception report options, or they may choose an option of their own, including, for example, shutting the project down. More of that later. However, the ball is now in the project board's court. Let's suppose that they like option 3, whatever that was. They then ask a project manager, right, here we are partway through a stage. Picture this. This is very, very important. We haven't got to the end of the stage, and they're asking for an exception plan request. So if we're partway through, let's say, stage 3, let's say it's halfway through, then the other half of stage 3 is not going to happen. We're going to create an exception plan that fills in the gap. Almost certainly, that new way will have different time, costs, resources, different products, even a different end date duration. You see, when the project board considered this exception, as I said, they could decide it's not worth proceeding, prematurely close the project. But they do have other options, which I won't go into too much detail. Suffice to say, they might say, well, let's relax those tolerances because we gave those to the project manager for the stage plan, but we have got a little in hand for the project level tolerances. Let's, however, assume they want an exception plan. As I've described, that's the project manager now triggering managing a stage boundary process, but this time not going in through the next stage plan door, but through the exception plan door. Please notice the activity is called prepare exception plan. But, and this is important, just like a next stage plan, this exception plan, which is at stage level, we now need to feed that into the project plan and update that, look at the bigger picture. We need to update the business case to make sure that's still viable, and so on and so forth. All of these also. But this time, all we're saying is we now want to approve an exception plan, not a stage plan, because we never got there. So watch carefully. This now goes back to the project board, who meet again. It's not an end stage assessment, it's partway through a stage, and it's called an exception assessment, or EXA. And here is where we see the dual name of this activity called authorize a stage or exception plan. But what happens if the exception report shows that not just stage tolerances are forecast to be exceeded, but also project level tolerances? Well, you will recall that those who set the project level tolerances are the business or commissioning layer. And so the project board executive will pass the exception report up to them so that they can make a decision on what to do next. What happens now? Well, if they approve it, we're all fine and dandy. They might prematurely close the project. They could do whatever they want, but be very clear. They like the exception plan, or rather they accepted it. Once the project board have approved the exception plan, it becomes in effect a stage plan for the next stage, inserted into what was originally the remainder of the previous stage. Managing that stage, which means authorizing now probably a modified work package, and this whole cycle starts over. Until what? Well, until the end of that stage. If we got through that, then the project manager will then start preparing the next stage plan, and the whole cycle continues. However, let's bring our story to a close by looking down here. Suppose we are now in the final management stage, whatever number that is, and the project manager has just received the final work package. There's no way we want to start preparing for the next stage. This is no longer needed. What the project manager does, however, is recognise that the project end is approaching, and here that will trigger the closing of project or CP process. The first thing that happens here is the project manager needs to prepare for a planned closure. And what this will normally involve is the project manager will use the communication management approach to identify exactly who needs to know the project's about to close the project log, our good old friend there, and ensure that all project information is secured and archived. And then advise the project board that we're about to close, coming up shortly. However, the next activity is confirm project acceptance. And this involves several things. Most importantly is prepare follow-on action recommendations. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I often call them loose ends, simply because as the project comes to a close and we're trying to get acceptance, there will be things that need to be shut down. This might include passing on any work issues or risks to the operational staff. It would mean checking that the benefits management approach includes any post-project activities. Remember the benefits management approach? Because there will very likely be benefits that have yet to happen. And examine the PID to confirm how the products, assuming it's products, are to be passed on to those who will look after them and maintain them in their operational life. Then evaluate the project, which is looking back over your shoulder and saying, so how did we do? Do you remember the PID that was signed off back in initiating a project? Well, every time we get to an end stage, we'll not only look at the baseline version at this point, but also the updated baseline version as we go through each end stage assessment. So here, evaluating the project will look back at aspects such as this, and it provides the complete history of what happened throughout the project. This isn't an opportunity for the project manager to be horsewhipped, but merely just the facts. Also within the end project report, you'll include lessons learned, although this may, as I've suggested here, be created as a separate document. All that remains, therefore, is for the project manager, who can only request project closure, not actually do it, is to provide a project closure request to the project board, and they use the activity Authorize Project Closure, and then advise the world that this becomes the formal project management close. But I haven't quite finished. There may be, you see, for whatever reasons I've discussed thus far, that the project board decide to prematurely close the project, in which case this needs to go in through a different doorway, if you will, and the activity here is to prepare a premature closure. Now, there are some significant potential differences here between a planned closure and a premature closure. One of them, for example, is that if you're closing prematurely, there may be products that need to be made safe, or maybe they should be completed. A nice mindset here is to imagine it's a construction project where you've got a new office headquarters building where it's partially completed and for whatever reason it's not going to, you need to make it safe. There may be expensive plant that shouldn't be stolen and you need to make sure it's for health and safety reasons that people can't climb it or hurt themselves in any way. So a premature close will often have lots of these things that need to occur. And very often you'll find that these extra activities due to a premature close may indeed blow the tolerances for the stage you're currently in which case preparing a premature close could trigger an exception report from the project manager to the project board. Other than that, however, these extra activities are carried out and you can see exactly the same thing happens. Having done that, we need to confirm project acceptance, even though here the customer almost certainly will not get all they expected, and also to evaluate the project, possibly even more importantly here, since we could learn lessons from why we had to bring it to a premature close. Very good. Well, that brings us to an end. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Yes, it's quite a busy diagram, isn't it? But there's no other way to tell this story. And very often diving into the manual, looking at the detailed activities in the 7 processes can seem daunting. I hope you agree that my PRINCE2 7th edition roadmap, focusing on the processes and major products, will actually give you a well-structured understanding of the way in which the PRINCE2 method works to deliver successful projects. So my name's Dave from Projex Academy, and if you want to find out more about our latest PRINCE2 7th edition masterclass, hop on over to Projex Academy. That's PROJEX.com. So until then, from me, Dave, it's bye for now.